This is the Observations Podcast for Friday, the 17th of March, 2023. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Dale Franks. And as you can see from the empty office, I guess it's behind me this way. As you can see from the empty office behind me, Michael stepped out for a second and is not back. So while he is gone, it is a good time for me to announce that this is our last Friday podcast. Yes, we will no longer be doing the podcast on Friday. Unfortunately, schedules have interfered and we are going to have to swap some things out. So starting next week, we will be streaming at 5 p.m. Eastern. 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern, right here on YouTube. So the day is going to change. We'll switch to Sunday instead of Friday. So for those of you who watch live, you're going to have to find something else to do with your Friday nights because it's not going to be listening to us. So enjoy your free Friday. I know that I and Michael probably will. And so we'll be back next Sunday, not this Sunday, not day after tomorrow, next Sunday. And
not going back to back.
Not going back to back. No, I mean, we could because when you and I talk, we could just go for hours, but next Sunday. So this is our last Friday podcast. Have I beaten that into the ground enough at this point? Hi, Michael. How you doing?
Good. How are you doing, Dale?
I'm doing okay. It was an interesting week this week because we got I don't know what the actual name of the committee is that James Comer runs in the House, but they've been looking for some banking records.
Government oversight, I think.
Okay. But in any event, they've been looking for some banking records, some suspicious banking records involving the Biden family. They apparently got them this week. And 2 months after Joe Biden left the White House, apparently $3 million came to this company, which I actually have here, Jackson something.
Marshall. Something LLC. John Marshall or Jack Marshall. Something.
Robinson Walker LLC.
Walker, that's it.
So
Walker.
They received $3 million from State Energy HK Limited in China, and several Biden family members, Hunter Biden, James Biden, Haley Biden, and an unknown bank account, just known as Biden, also got $70,000 in total with these incremental payments. Biden family members, including the unnamed Biden, ended up with $1 million out of that 60 days after he left the vice presidency. I don't really want to get into the details of Joe Biden and what his corruption may or may not be. I don't believe Joe Biden is an honest fella, and so it would not surprise me to learn that he was corrupt. I would not be, as Inspector Renault in Casablanca, shocked to learn that there's gambling going on here. I think the problem is that I'm not shocked.
And you hit the nail on the head there, that this doesn't seem at all out of the norm. As a matter of fact, we almost expect that this sort of thing goes on. And we've just come to accept it. And that's the appalling thing. And we've been sort of trained to accept this because nobody ever suffers any consequences for it. Nobody gets impeached. Nobody's ever held to account in front of an actual court. Oh, and Republicans do at times, not all of them, but some of them do, for much less serious infractions. Certainly, Manafort was raked over the coals, as was General, what's his face?
Petraeus?
No, the other one.
General Flynn, Mike Flynn.
Yeah, Mike Flynn. We've just sort of come to accept that this is just how it works, and it's not okay. I mean, Hillary Clinton getting away with actually all the Clintons getting away with what they got away with is, I mean, just beyond belief. Even Al Gore. I could go down the list. Menendez, hell, Cuomo. I mean, just then they get slaps on the wrist. At worst, they get booted from office early. But we've just come to accept that that's just the way it works, that it's a corrupt political class, that of course, they sell influence. And we just seem to be okay with that for some reason. I mean, I'm not, but a lot of us seem to be.
We don't even have to go back to the Clintons. I mean, we just go back to the last couple of years. Now, by the way, Trump was impeached twice. So,
yeah, exactly.
I mean, that did happen. The only president to be impeached twice. He is when it comes.
He holds the record.
He is a big winner. No one gets impeached.
It's a huge record.
Yeah, no one gets impeached like me. But you go back to whatever you want to go back to. James Comey just announcing the FBI is not going to make a criminal referral because nobody would prosecute this. Not your job, not the FBI's job. Now, trust me, I know the Department of Justice wouldn't have prosecuted anyway, but at least it was their job to make the announcement. But he can do that. Andrew McCabe lying to the FBI in an IG investigation. Sure, he got fired, but he got his pension and everything else, so he's fine. He's just fine.
James Brennan lying in front of Congress. Who was the other one? The intelligence guy. No, Brennan was the intelligence guy. It was the other CNN contributor who blatantly lied to Congress. No. We don't. We're not surveilling any emails or email traffic or internet traffic from Congress. We wouldn't do that. Yes, you did.
Yeah, it. You know, we used to have this idea in this country that corruption was endemic, not to the United States, not to Western Europe or places like that, not the advanced countries. We'd gone beyond that. Oh, sure, in the dirty, poor countries, there was corruption all over the place. But we were this beacon of I guess, liberty, a beacon of virtue, of ethics, and
true government, righteous government.
Yeah, exactly. Turns out not so much. And I can't help but think that this, and it's beginning to look like it's institutionalized corruption. And it's been going on for a while. I mean, Congress exempted themselves from insider trading laws. Okay, great. They make a lot of money. Sure, they have an ethics committee. I'm not sure what it does or who's ever gotten in trouble for it, for any ethics violations. Not usually.
George Santos is probably going to be the first. Well,
talk about a guy that has it coming.
Yeah, no kidding.
And I think we have to get over this idea that we are some sort of incorruptible bastion. I think we have to realize that corruption is pervasive and endemic to our government, and I don't know how to fix that.
Any government. I mean, our founders knew this. They knew that when they set it up, that it wasn't going to prevent all fraud and abuse and corruption, but they tried to build in as many outlets to resolving that problem as they could. And, I mean, they obviously couldn't think of everything. That they thought of as much as they did is actually pretty remarkable. We don't. Government in and of itself is a corrupt organization. It is using the powers that it has been granted from the people to weigh over the people. Now, it can do it justly, it can do it unjustly. Eventually, it's going to do it unjustly. I mean, there's just simply no doubt about that. It always happens. It would always happen. You cannot set up a perfectly virtuous government. It's not possible. The only way to hold them in check is either to have a lot more often elections, which nobody really wants, or to actually have a rule of law that holds them to account just like anybody else. And we don't have that.
I think the problem is exacerbated when government gets too large.
Mm-hmm.
And the larger the government, the more possibility there is of corruption.
Well, and the deeper they reach into our lives, the more opportunities for grift and graft. You also have a larger cabal now to protect each other's backs. You've got plenty of what was the term they used in The Wolf of Wall Street? Rat holes to use to hide what you're actually doing. Yeah, I mean, and it's not so much even the size of the federal government just as the government, but it's the size of the bureaucracy. Unelected, uh, unaccountable people who have great control over our lives, our everyday lives, to the point where they decide we can't have gas stoves anymore. Well, you know what? It's kind of hard to figure out how they can't do that. And that's for a reason. I mean, we live in like the Byzantine Empire in like the early 1400s right now.
Yeah, by the way, I was assured, by the way, that the government had no intention of shutting down gas ranges.
Well, that's your media for you. They have their thumb on the pulse.
I have bad news for you, Michael. I don't think we're broadcasting.
You're kidding.
I was looking for the last couple of video casts. I can't even open up. Okay, well, I'm getting somebody in chat. Let me ask, are we still live? Because I don't know. It says, I was looking for the last couple of video casts on the YouTube channel. They seem to be on Rumble, but no longer on YouTube.
Wow, we got canceled that quickly.
Yeah, that would be amazing. I am told that we are still live.
Okay, good.
Okay, great. So we are still broadcasting, even though I've got some serious. I cannot open up a browser to save my life. So Chrome, Edge, Brave, they're all down. I just happened to notice that my YouTube window went black, and I've been feverishly opening.
Really hates us.
Yeah, I've been feverishly opening up browser windows, but they say they're watching us live, so they're watching us live. So
right.
at least according to OBS, we're still broadcasting. Now, I have been so discombobulated, I don't even know what the last thing was that you said. In any event, okay, the government is corrupt, and it's much easier, I think, for people to believe that we are still, we have a good government, we have an honest government, because believing the truth would imply that something would have to be done about it. And nobody wants to do that.
Moderately competent government, especially compared to a lot of other places. I mean, they haven't screwed everything up yet. But
we're heading that direction.
Well, especially when you look at the big things that they try to do, and they can't do them. I mean, we haven't had a real government, a federal government works project that was done in less than a decade since the 40s. Maybe the 60s with the interstate highways.
No, I would say the interstate highways, the Apollo program. That was
the Apollo program.
Yeah. That was about it. There seems to be something that happened around 1972 or 1973, and everything just went right off the rails.
Oh wait, that's right. There was an EPA created around there, wasn't there?
Yeah, there was. That probably didn't help. I don't know what. And the weird thing is that the people who are supposed to be looking out for corruption, the people who are supposed to be tracking it down, the media are happy collaborators in it. If not collaborators, at least enablers. Because all you're going to hear about this James Comer thing, I mean, I don't think anything is going to come of it. I think you're going to get a lot of people saying, well, look, this is all just Republican. It's Republicans pounce again.
Right.
And, once the Republican pounce phase is over, It's all going to go just drifting off into the distance and we'll forget all about it. Just like nobody cares about Hillary Clinton's emails, as Bernie Sanders so famously said, I am sick and tired of hearing about your emails. Yeah, you and everybody else in the press.
Yeah. Well, and that's the problem is they've chosen a side. And I, for the life of me, I don't think any of these people realize what they've actually chosen. They have simply swallowed the mother's milk uh, that says, Republicans are racist and evil. Anything conservative is just for rich people and trying to make themselves richer off the backs of other people. Um, they don't, they never ever take in good faith any arguments that come from the right side. Um, and then they are just absolutely credulous when it comes to anything from the left. And what I think bothers me the most about it, we're not talking about, whether this works or that works. We actually know for a fact that things that are being proposed from the left do not work. They do work. We have empirical evidence, 100 years of empirical evidence, actually more than that if you want to be really specific, that it doesn't work. Why would you keep proposing the same things over and over and over again when you know they don't work? Oh, well, it gets us votes. We can buy votes that way. We can use your money to buy us votes. Yeah, didn't somebody, de Tocqueville, say something about granting themselves the largesse of the public? I
Well,
mean, that's where we are,
that's the business that the government is in. And all of these
essentially.
things sound good because they sound compassionate and
Right.
they sound so reasonable and helpful. And
And if you what do you hate kids? Why didn't you want them to go to Head Start? You want them to be stupid forever? It doesn't work. We have empirical evidence that it doesn't work. And it
yeah,
costs
well,
a
look,
ton of money.
it's just like Randy Weingarten talking about how we have to get together with the government so that we can maintain the quality of our public education. The public education that's graduating 40% of their high school graduates as functional illiterates. Is that what we're looking to maintain?
Right. I mean, well, you've heard the reports out of I think the one that made the biggest splash was the one out of Baltimore, where uh, essentially the school districts overall, and I can't remember how many there are in Baltimore County. Uh, it's maybe 10% are uh, at proficiency level for their grade. There were 23, I think, schools where nobody, not one person, was at proficiency level for their grade. Not a single person. Some of these schools, there was a high school where one of the people in the top 10% of his class in the school had a 0.14 grade average. You're functionally useless at that point. You literally know nothing. You may know how to do a drug deal somewhere
Well,
in Baltimore.
I guarantee you, 95% of these students can rap out whatever the current accepted diversity, equity, inclusion rap happens to be.
But they don't know anything. And our schools are quickly becoming indoctrination centers and not actual education centers. Um, it's problematic. There was, I'm sure you saw this, some Harvard English literature professor who spoke about, and she had, I think, like second years, maybe it was freshman or second years, um, who struggled to get through the prose of Nathaniel Hawthorne. Now, I'll grant you this. It is kind of boring. It's a bit stilted. But I read it in ninth grade, and I can understand it. I mean, how,
Yeah, I had to
how far have
read.
we come where you don't get it?
Yeah, I had to read Moby Dick in junior high for cripe's
Yeah.
sake.
I, and look, yeah, it's tough language. It's older. It's very crammed together, run-on sentences. I get it. I don't like reading it. I never did, but I could understand it. I mean, it wasn't beyond my comprehension. It was just beyond my, you know, willing to give a fuck.
Well, I can't imagine in public high school them actually teaching Shakespeare anymore.
I don't know how they could. I mean, you have to have a lexicon next to you. The only good Shakespeare readers that I've ever seen have in the margins, the call outs for the different words and phrases to what they meant at the time and what he's alluding to. Because you might be able to get the what was meant for the highbrow set, but in order to really understand Shakespeare, you have to also know what he meant for the peanut gallery, what
Yes,
all the jokes
but if
are.
you can't read modern English,
Yeah,
you're certainly not going to be able to read 16th century English.
no, it's going to be very difficult, and it's not going to make any sense to you, which is a shame because, and this is what literature and art used to be about, was finding the commonalities of man and expressing that in musical fashion, in a painting, a picture, in a work of fiction. Um, it was looking at the commonality of man and the problems we all face, the
Oh, we
issues.
don't do that anymore. No,
No, now
no,
we have to.
no,
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 that's just from a
no.
white man's perspective.
No, you can't really understand a literature unless it's written by someone from your point of view,
Right.
someone with whom you share the same skin color or the same ethnicity or whatever. This idea that literature is some universal experience, well, obviously it's rooted in white supremacy and racism.
Yeah. And I think the biggest tragedy is these kids are going to wake up one day and realize, wait, we were lied to
No, they're
all
not.
that.
No, they're not. You
I
know
think
what?
they, at least some of them will.
Yeah,
I
maybe a
did.
small percentage will. The rest of them are turning out exactly the way that they are intended to turn out.
Yeah.
Tranquilized, gullible followers who are willing to do what they're told. That's the
Right.
point.
They're being turned into automatons in service of the state and being, well, what did Lenin call it? Building the perfect socialist man. Um, I mean, that's what they're doing. That's literally what this is. And let's face it, this whole woke stuff, there's the big thing about, oh, the white can't define woke. Um,
No, Bethany Mandel couldn't define woke on the spur of the moment.
right,
That doesn't mean
whatever.
that it can't be defined
No,
because
it can be
about
defined quite
10,000,
well. And
because
she's
about,
done it like millions of
yeah,
times
and
already. So,
10,000 people have done it in the 36 hours since she screwed it up yesterday morning.
right. But I, I just, I think the simplest explanation is just warmed over Marxism. It simply traded out race or gender for class. It hasn't, it's the exact same message. It's the exact same mechanics. Um, it is simply changed, the capitalist class to white males and the underclass, the proletariats to, marginalized groups, whoever they may. So now it's a one size fits all.
Yeah, but that's, I think, because that makes sense in the American perspective. When you start talking about class to Americans,
It's
their
difficult.
eyes glaze over. They have
Yeah.
no idea what you're talking about. There is some,
Almost everybody thinks they're in the middle class.
yeah, exactly. And to the extent that, that is a class, which it's really not. It
No,
basically is an income level. It's not a class. The
right.
reason why qua Marxism worked as it did in Europe was because they had classes. They
They
had
had actual
they
aristocracies.
had literal social classes that you could never become a member of because
Right.
you were not born into them. They were hereditary.
Right.
That isn't the American experience. So how do you take basically all of this socialist BS and pawn it off on Americans. Well, you know what Americans did have? They had slavery. Now, so did
Exactly.
everybody else. But we had slavery. Then we had 100 years of Jim Crow. Thank you, Supreme Court. So it makes sense in American terms. Okay, now race is the thing. And look, America has been a pretty racist country. Not substantially racist than every other country in the world.
Probably one of the least racist countries in the world,
because
actually.
because all countries are racist to one degree or another, and
Yeah.
in modern terms, probably more racist than the United States is, certainly in many countries. But it makes sense in our with our history to go for race, and then you get to the just the revisionist history, the 1611 project. Oh, okay. Well, let's just make up.
1619.
Or yeah, 1619? Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
sure. 1619. Let's just make up an American history that never actually occurred.
Hmm. Yeah, because you've now got the framework. You already know where the pieces go. All you got to do is change the names of the pieces, put them right where they would have been if we had been talking about class. So you change the names of the pieces, you reorganize who the oppressors are, and right back to it. Okay, here we go. This is how you're being oppressed. This is who oppresses you. Um, and obviously they set up everything in their favor. That's your enemy.
And
And there's a lot more of us than of those people, so we can overtake them.
and here's the thing, you have to hand it to the progressives. The Gramscian march through the institutions really did work.
Long and slow, but
But
it worked
progressives
wonders.
own everything
Yeah.
now. Certainly everything that has to do with education, popular media,
Art.
art. I mean,
And I
there are
think,
no other alternatives.
well, and it's the arts, I think, that are the true downfall, because the arts are where we used to express our human spirit and our longing for something better. Um, our suffering, but also our willingness to work towards triumph over ourselves, over others, whatever it is. There's all the themes. When that gets taken over, and gets turned into this dystopian nightmare where some mangled piece of metal is art, where spots on a canvas is art, where a trash pile could be art. I mean, you've effectively killed off that medium of communication about human emotion, something that we can all relate to, and turned it into a specialized class. Only certain people can appreciate this. Only certain people can appreciate this. If you really want to learn about this, well, you need to be an ally and learn how to appreciate that. And that requires you bending the knee and kissing my ass and just doing whatever I tell you to do. Like what? Like that's not how it works. It's never how art has ever worked. It was to show accomplishments, legacies, to something to live on throughout history, to celebrate
Well,
things,
also to
people,
portray ideals of beauty
ideals.
or
Yeah,
ideals
right.
of truth.
Yes.
And it's hard to see what ideals are being portrayed in much of modern art. Because it's, in fact, the entire idea of we have to get away from representational art. We have to move into the more abstract. And look, there's a place for abstract art. I don't have anything
I like abstract art.
against it, but that is largely what's left. Just
It,
incomprehensible muddlings of, in terms of painting,
it's
paint.
all
It's
Emperor's
all
New
Jackson
Clothes
Pollock.
art. Yeah. Jackson Pollock, there was something kind of cool. I don't know if you've ever seen one in person. I have. And it is kind of cool because these are giant pieces of art. And there's a composition and balance to them that is kind of cool. But at the same time, it's not what we would consider art. in terms of skill, right? It you didn't have to draw anything by hand and recreate something in a realistic fashion or even like an impressionist fashion. You didn't draw out any like real truth about the human condition. Um, I think of that where was it in Boston? The Lincoln statue about slavery and the guy in chains being lifted up by Lincoln, and they got rid of that because oh no, the slave is subservient. Like, do you not get the point of this? Can you not see the story being told here? No, 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 nope, that's bad.
I I can't. You mentioned sculpture, and the idea of somebody holding their hands out to Lincoln, and I couldn't help but think of down in Richmond the Arthur Ashe
Oh
statue.
God, where he's
That is
molesting multiple
right on.
kids.
He's not molesting them; he's beating them with a tennis racket, uh, and they're all holding their hands up like this.
No, stop.
Yeah, and it's supposed to be they're receiving because he was big into reading for children and
He
teaching
was.
children
He
how to
was
read.
actually a big
And
benefactor
so
of
you
that.
would think that the kids would be holding their hands out, palms up to receive it. No, they're all like that. He's holding up this tennis racket like he's about to beat him. Uh,
There's
nice
good art
try.
and there's bad art.
Nice try, but it is probably the most unintentionally hilarious monument in this country.
I would agree that that was not the intention.
It's just, great idea. Execution
But then there's like
could be
those,
better.
the church stained glass windows where you've got the priest, giving a blessing to some like altar boy or little boy, and he's down on his knees right in front of the priest. He's got his hand on top of
Yeah.
his head. Like, yeah, that didn't age well.
Yeah. Well, actually, probably aged for a couple of hundred years. It's just been the last 20 or 30 that it hasn't aged well at all. But again, and of course, this is the church, not government, although it's
It's a
still,
government of its own, yeah.
it's a government of its own. The inability to punish priests for child molestation. It's a much bigger problem than just the American government. And this, and I guess we used to call it transnational progressivism.
Hmm.
It's not only taken over here, but you can look in Western Europe, and it just has completely taken over in Western Europe. There, I mean,
Australia.
there's hardly a conservative in any European country that would be considered anything less than a moderate Democrat
Oh
in
yeah.
American terms. Um, you have the WEF crowd who, by the way, pal around with all these politicians. Indeed, they can't even wait to get to Davos every year to hang
I
out with
know.
Klaus Schwab and all of his buddies. I remember growing up reading the books about the Illuminati
Yeah.
and about how the Illuminati, they were this big secret group, and no one knew who was in the
The eye on the
Illuminati.
top of the pyramid.
Yeah, but yeah, exactly. But they were, behind. They were controlling through their conspiratorial stuff everything that was going on in the world. Indeed, there was a series of video games, the Deus Ex games, which basically you're a UN special agent in New York and you come across the Illuminati and you figure out what it is that they're trying to do. They managed to carry that across, I think, 4 games. And the interesting thing is that the Illuminati exist. It's not a conspiracy. They're quite open about it. They meet in
Yeah.
Davos, Switzerland every year to tell us exactly how we're going to live our lives. You will own nothing and be happy.
Yeah.
Eat the bugs. Get rid
Eat
of
the
your
bugs, peasant.
get rid of your cars. And they just assume that they have the right to dictate to the rest of us. They're talking. I think this last meeting they were talking about how sad it is that we just don't have a world government. Boy, if we could only have a one world government, that would just fix all of our problems. I mean, they're not hiding it. They're quite open about it.
And unashamed. They really feel entitled to be the providers of this guidance.
And why not?
They just simply know.
They're rich. Therefore, they must be smarter than the rest of us. Their ability to make money has given them an ineffable wisdom about the ordering of all human society that we should not question. And, look, I don't mind if some rich guy sitting on an island thinks I should run the world, as long as he doesn't have the power to do it. But increasingly,
Right.
these guys are
Once you get enough of
getting
them
the power to
together.
do it. Yeah, once you get enough of them together, and they're all meeting in Switzerland, right out there in the open,
Mhm.
and they're totally unashamed of the
With
stuff they talk about.
politicians lapping at their heels.
Oh yeah, they cannot wait to show up at Davos
Yeah.
and hobnob with Klaus Schwab and all the rest of them there.
Like, could you come up? I mean, it's hard to me to think that even what's his face who wrote the James Bond novels,
Ian
um,
Fleming.
yeah, would be like, yeah, Klaus Schwab, that's maybe a little over the top.
Yeah, I can barely pull off Spectre and Ernst Stavro Blofeld. Klaus Schwab, I just don't see how I could write that.
It's just so perfect. It's just like, dude, you look at him and you're like, did they get you out of like typecasting?
Well, you've seen that picture of him where he decided to wear what looked like just a caricature of a Bond villain. I mean, the only way he could have done it more is if he'd actually worn the freaking Nehru jacket without buttons and the high
And I had a little dog.
or a cat, a fluffy white Persian cat with a diamond collar. And apparently he was perfectly happy to have himself photographed in that Dr. Evil outfit. I mean, just a little too on the nose. I mean, it's like he's telling us, what are you going to do?
Yeah, right.
I'm finally comfortable enough to the point where I can wear my Sith Lord robes in public and be photographed for it.
Now it's time on Sprockets when we rule.
I'm as happy as a little girl.
Oh
And
my goodness.
the funny thing is that so many people, I guess their lives are fine. They just don't see what's going on. They don't see how. I saw a thing today. Somebody was offering it was a job for a training manager position or director of training or something like that. And they were like, okay, well, you'll be, training, doing curriculum and training employees and doing this. And we expect, of course, that you're very knowledgeable with the principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Okay, well, that just seems to be the way things are going. And everybody seems to be perfectly happy with it. Nobody seems to, especially with this diversity, equity, inclusion stuff, where literally no one seems to realize that these are the same arguments that Orville Faubus and Lester Maddox were making in the late 1950s to try to keep Alabama and Georgia segregated. They've just flipped it around now. In fact, what did I see today? That doctors are now talking about whether, maybe it would be best if you have to get a surgical procedure that you get it from someone of your own race.
What?
Yeah.
First of all, how's that even going to be possible since most of them are from the Middle East or from like India? And second of all,
Yeah, we do have a large number of Central Asian doctors.
Yeah.
Well, after all, the argument went, we did it in the 40s and 50s. And by the way, this is being put forward with a straight face. This is not a joke. This is not some parody. This is not a parody or a caricature. This is not parodyable. You can't satirize this. Grown adults with advanced degrees are now discussing, maybe we should have race-based medical care.
Wow. It's like we flushed everything down the toilet since the Enlightenment.
Well,
It's just-
it's increasingly beginning to feel that way. I think we talked about this maybe a couple of well, probably several months ago at this point. I'm getting to the point that I am literally fearful over the next 30 to 40 years. Hopefully, that is a timeline under which I might be able to escape this place before it all comes crashing down. But I am doubtful of our ability to maintain our civilization for too much longer.
I I, I couldn't disagree. Uh, it really has gotten that scary, especially when you look. So, for example, the whole thing that went on at Stanford, I think it was actually last week, but this week it was when it bubbled over,
Right, yeah.
and how Stanford reacted to that. And none of these future now, Stanford is a highly regarded, like top three law school, um, top two law school. Uh, these are the elite of the elite who are going to school there. They clearly are good at taking some tests and studying. They must well do well on, whatever the approximation of IQ tests are that you have to take in order to get in there. So they're not stupid people, and yet they have no interest in knowledge. They think they already know everything. They're simply after the credential, and they want that credential on their own terms. They don't see it as a training or a path to knowledge.
By the way, you may want
What
to give
about them?
some background on this.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So, a judge from the Fifth Circuit, I'm forgetting his name right now, um, he was invited by the federal, um, what is it, the Federalist
The
Society?
Federalist Society.
Yeah. To give a speech about, he sits on the Fifth Circuit, which is the appellate court for like Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, I think Oklahoma, um, and I think that's about it. Um, it's a powerful circuit. It's a well-known circuit. What goes on in the Fifth Circuit gets paid attention to by the Supreme Court. So he sits on this circuit. He's a Trump-appointed circuit judge, so he's got that going against him. But he was invited by FedSoc to go and give a speech about basically three subjects that are kind of current. Uh, I can't remember. It was something about like internet access, or not internet access, but like social media, privacy, and I don't know, something else. So the left at Stanford decides to make a big hullabaloo about this, and found some administrators on their side. Shocker. Uh, they really tried to do everything they could to get him canceled beforehand. And then when that didn't work, they showed up to the speech, heckled him the entire time with several administrators in the audience. Uh, Basically prevented him from giving his speech to where he got pissed, lashed back a little bit, then asked for an administrator to come down and like get control of the situation. The administrator who I think her name is Tyrion Steinbeck or something like that, is the DEI coordinator and director for all of Stanford.
Of course.
And so she comes down and talks about how uncomfortable she is and about how his rulings and his words do harm to everybody. But she really wants him to give his speech. It's just that you really hurt people and you're a bad person. But you know what? We have a free speech policy. You should be able to talk. It's just that you're really, really bad and evil. And it makes sense to me why people would feel unsafe. And so I'm just going to tell everybody, why don't you just leave if you just can't handle. So obviously a bunch of people leave, having taken up seats from people who would have liked to have been there. And they stream out and they heckle him on the way out. So he tries to go back to his remarks, still can't do it. He's still getting heckled. Finally, he just goes to Q&A. And they couldn't even get that right. Like, there were no actual questions. It was just all accusations. Why don't you account for your life as a white man kind of questions? And so he just ended it. The federal marshals had to walk him out of the auditorium for his own protection, he was told. He blistered. There were some reporters there who put up the videos and stuff. He blistered them in, I can't remember if it was an op-ed, not even an op-ed, or like a letter. I can't remember, but I know that he made some comments. He got a letter from the dean of the law school or the president of the law school, apologizing for the behavior, but not promising to actually do anything about it. That president then got mobbed by all of these law students. Somebody estimated about a third of the law school class, which I'm going to assume is somewhere around 200 to 300 people who wore masks and like stared her down. She teaches con law. They screwed up her con law class. They like intimidated her. They wrote all these op-eds. They tried to get her fired. Like, they have just gone to the mat over this because a conservative judge gave a speech. These people are lunatics. And they're going to be the leaders, getting back to what we were talking about. These are the people who are going to be your congressmen, your administrators, your law school professors, probably professors in college. They're going to be on all these boards and, infiltrated into these corporations. They're going to be consultants, and they're going to be at the upper echelons
And
of
they
how
are
everything
complete
works.
know-nothings.
And they don't know anything, and they refuse to learn. They are not interested. They think they already know it all.
Of course
It's
they do.
really that simple for them.
Again, it goes right back to what we've talked about for years. This is not politics. It is not an ideology. It is a secular religion. It is
Right.
immune to reason. It is immune to anything and amenable to nothing but faith.
Right. Yeah. It's well, and that easily explains why they get so worked up
Of
about
course, it's heresy.
exactly. It becomes heretical offerings if you don't agree with them a priori.
And make no
And
mistake,
why they
they
will
will have.
never ever subject. This is not an intellectual movement, because if it was an intellectual movement, there would be some effort to convince somebody of their ideas. No, 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 no. There is no convincing. In fact, everything is as if it came down from God on high.
It's what Thomas Sowell called the vision of the anointed.
Right.
We have received our wisdom from, well, we certainly can't say God,
No.
but
Gaia.
we have from Gaia. We have received our wisdom. And by the way, make no mistake about it. They will have no compunctions whatsoever if they get the power to do so, to punish anyone who disagrees.
We already know this. We have lived through the 20th century is replete with with exactly these sorts of things. We have seen this. I mean, not just Soviet Russia, not just Cuba, not just the Eastern Bloc, Ceausescu, not just Turkey, not just Saudi Arabia, Iran. How about Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, where they murdered something like a third to a fourth of, or a fourth to a third of their own population, just because they could not be trusted. Anybody who had an original thought, anybody who had been educated,
People
anybody
who wore glasses.
who wore glasses, you could not be trusted. Only certain people could be trusted, and we're just going to literally slaughter. There was no re-education. I mean, that's what we're talking about here. It's often compared, and that we are doing that. Well, It's happening here in America with the Maoist struggle sessions, which are these open air confessionals where you're torn down for your sins against the state, essentially. This actually used to happen in the Catholic Church at the very early beginnings of the Catholic Church. When you confess sins, you didn't do it in a confessional to a priest. You did it before the whole congregation. And you had to be forgiven by the whole congregation. It was a very public thing. Well, these aren't moral sins. These are sins against the state that are turned into moral sins because the state is the keeper of all morals. I mean, how could it not be looked at as a religion? It operates like one. It has all the trappings of one.
It has all of the ceremonies of one. These struggle sessions that you were just talking about, fairly common now on college campuses to have to go in, and administrators are subjected to it, and professors are subjected to it all the time now, where you have to go in and this group of students just berate you. I mean, hell, that's why Brett Weinstein had to leave
He and his wife,
Evergreen
yeah.
College, yeah.
And he's
But
11.
basically, he left because he just said, "I'm not going to sit through this struggle session, and you can all go screw. And I have tenure, so if I walk, you got to pay me."
Yeah. And how's Evergreen doing nowadays? I don't think it's doing well.
Yeah, it's well, again, once these people start running something, it loses its value because it becomes a vehicle for ideological conformity. It's not a place of learning anymore. And Stanford is a perfect example of this. These kids are not interested in learning the law. They're certainly not interested in learning the Constitution. They clearly have no respect for it. And by the way,
Right.
we're seeing that all over the place, not just with the Second Amendment, which has always been under kind of attack because, people kill each other. Shock me. Um, but the First Amendment now is just under constant fire. And there is a significant percentage of this country who believe that, sure, you have free speech as long as, as long as you say the approved things.
Yeah. Yeah, as long as you agree with me. And they don't get that the only point to free speech is to be able to say the things that you don't agree with, that you don't like. You
Yes,
know?
but see, you cover that by just simply saying, well, speech can be violent.
Yeah, right. Speech is violence. It's Orwellian.
And we have this country, not just this country, we have certainly a developed world that only can exist via a very complex maneuvering of industrial production, services, transportation, logistics and supply chains, agriculture, and electrical power generation, uh, energy production, primarily petroleum at this stage in our development, but also nuclear energy production. All of these things are a very, very delicately balanced machine that people have to know how this works. And these fantastical ideas that, people increasingly believe that food is produced at the grocery store.
Well, you're basically describing iPencil, right? I mean, nobody knows how a pencil's made. They don't know where all this stuff comes from. And yet no one single person can make a pencil. Just like no single person, well, maybe it's actually I would say it's a bit easier to produce a pork loin chop for the grocery store than it is to create a pencil, much less a machine, a generator.
Yeah,
You know,
but the machine, the generator, is the microcosm. The macrocosm requires people with real expertise and a real understanding of how the real world works. And the real world is immune to ideology, it is immune to belief.
the
Reality,
copybook editing.
yeah,
Yeah,
reality is what it is. And no matter how much you pretend it's otherwise, reality will always be what it is. And so we have this complex, delicate machinery where major cities in this country, and really all over the world, you may, if you count all of the local warehouses, you may have 3 days of food in your city. Maybe.
At best, yeah.
At best. And if one part of the transportation system breaks down, that food is gone. We had these, a couple of weeks ago, we had what appeared to be hacking attacks on the electrical infrastructure. And then also we had those people who were just attacking power substations.
Right, yeah. Yeah, look, that goes down. If your refrigeration goes,
that's it.
If you don't get daily deliveries, you're out of food.
Yeah, and if you live in a city and the electrical grid goes down, you better have a lot in that cabinet. Yeah. Because if people can't get food to you, if transportation is gone, if electricity is gone, what are you going to eat?
Man, canned green beans are going to go through the roof.
Yeah. Well, for the brief time that they're purchasable, yeah. And these Nimrods are the people who are, like you said at Stanford, they are the elites. They're going to be the people who are making decisions at the highest levels about how all of this machinery is going to work. And so what you end up with, like here in California, well, we've just decided that by 2035, you will not be able to buy a gasoline-powered vehicle in California.
Yeah. Maryland just made the same decision to
and of course, your state, Virginia,
we hooked ours to California.
Yeah, you latched yourself to California's rule, so now
still flabbergasted.
So now Virginia can't have gasoline-powered cars sold by 2035. Okay, great idea. Maybe some of these solid-state battery breakthroughs I've been hearing about over the last year or so, maybe they'll make it into production, and by 2035, we'll have an entire fleet of electric cars that we can drive for 300 miles and recharge in 5 minutes, and everything will be fine.
Right. Of course, we'll have no way to power them, but...
Yeah, of course. All of those electric cars will require electrical generation. Are we building any new power plants?
No. And the ones we do have are powered by... Oh, yeah, that's right. Coal
and natural gas.
Because if you're lucky, by natural gas.
Because the one source of power that would be able to make up the shortfall that would occur,
we can't allow that.
Nuclear power, we can't allow it. And so there are all these rules.
There's one down just outside of Atlanta, a reactor that just started to create fission. So it's going to be another 3 or 4 months now to where it'll actually build up enough heat where it can produce energy. And that's been like 20, 30 years in the making.
Yeah, we're not going to be able to power these cars. You can only buy an electrical car.
No way.
You can only buy an electric car, but you won't be able to charge it because we don't have the power infrastructure to do it.
You can get on your bike and do the...
And by the way, this isn't the first time California has done this. When I was working at Money Radio up in Los Angeles in the late 1990s, or the mid 1990s, actually, the state of California, the legislature, in their infinite wisdom, came up, and I did an entire week of 1-hour reports on this. I talked with the engineers and executives at Chrysler, at Ford, at General Motors, and the idea was California said you had to have, and I believe it was something, at least half of your fleet had to be zero emissions vehicles by 2007. And they did this in 1994, 1995, 12 years. And as I said at the time, well, in 12 years, that's not going to happen. And sure enough, it didn't, and they had to repeal it because it became obvious that it just literally couldn't happen. Are any lessons learned there? No. They have just now decreed in Sacramento, and by extension, Virginia, and now in Maryland, that, we're just going to have all electric vehicles by 2035. Really? And how are you going to ensure that happens? What groundwork are you going to lay? First of all, to ensure that technology is even available in 2035 on a mass production scale where people can afford it. Because have you looked at the price of a Tesla lately? I have. Can't afford it. And And if I can't power it, what's the use anyway? And
Right. I see a big comeback for cars from the 70s, early
yeah,
80s.
I mean, this
Well,
is
maybe
this is
not early
nothing
80s.
more than moral vanity. Where
That's all it is. That's exactly right.
Johnny
Well,
Polar Bear is
it's
sad,
the
so
same thing with Curtis Blofeld or whatever is Klaus Schwab. It's this idea that we can drive the change we actually need simply by controlling the people, and then everybody will be happy. And it's this just smug sense of self-righteousness and forward thinking that is nowhere experienced, has not been manifested in any way whatsoever, and is always wrong. These people always get it wrong. I mean, this is even a worse case than how Hayek described it in Road to Serfdom. We're talking about a centrally planned economy for the whole world. Are you kidding me? The number of input you would need to understand how to do that are beyond human comprehension. We couldn't even put them into a computer because we wouldn't know how many inputs to put in. It's like chaos, how chaos theory began. Tried to model weather, and then the computer program only kept the decimal places to 10 places, or at least the output. But inside the computer, it kept it to another 2 decimal places. And if you put in the wrong thing, you get a completely different reaction. And this came, the butterfly effect. Well, how can we possibly discern between those last 2 decimal places that are 11 and 12 places out on a global scale? You're going to have to go a lot further than that, and you're still going to get it wrong. It's just not possible. There's far too many inputs. There's far too many reactions and substitutes and innovations that are just going to make whatever plan you made at the beginning obsolete.
and
Even
by the
the
way,
Soviet Union realized
by the
that.
way, we know this idea of technocratic
Yes.
expertise and government by the technocrats, which was so popular among the progressives in the early 20th century. We had an entire century of trying to figure that out and make it work, and nobody has ever been able to make it work. Not because they didn't try hard, but because it's literally impossible.
Right. It can't be done. It simply cannot be done.
And by the
There's
way,
too many
Ludwig von
individual
Mises,
decisions.
far before Friedrich Hayek, Ludwig von Mises pointed this out in the 1920s. He's saying
That's
this
true.
can never
That's right.
work.
Well, and that's where
I mean, I don't know if you've ever
eventually
read.
Hayek got it from,
I
but
don't know if
yeah,
you've ever spent 5 or 6 years reading Socialism by Friedrich Hayek,
I did.
which is about what it takes because boy, does that fellow write some dense prose.
Is.
But boy, he takes it step by step and explains it very clearly. I mean, this has all
But
been
but he gives you the
obvious.
setup right at the beginning. The whole ethos behind socialism is selfishness. That's all it is. And selfishness and envy. Bingo. And once he sets you on that path, then he does a really good job of going through every little thing and showing how this works and how that works and why that it fits into his rubric. It was actually, it's not even that long a book.
Well, my copy of Socialism is probably about 550 pages.
Really?
Yeah,
I
and
thought mine was only like two
the
something.
text is really tiny. I mean,
So maybe I got an abridged version or something.
it's a pretty dense work to go through.
Yeah,
But
maybe I got an abridged version.
in any event, the fact is that these people are trying to do something that has failed for the last century.
Yeah.
And I'm getting
And we
tired.
know we have tried this. It goes back to what I said before. Why are you offering things that don't work? We know they don't work. Just stop. Offer something that is feel good to you, that you think is going to help people that I'm not reaching. Great. At least then we can have a compromise. But you're just offering the same things over and over again. And all that leads to is more power up top and less power for the people, which leads me to believe, pretty much inexorably at this point, that all you really care about is having power. And all your policies are about you having power. How does that help anybody? except you.
Yeah, well, whenever you're smarter than everybody else, you have to be in power because you're the only person who could be trusted to run it. Which,
Can't
kind of
imagine
goes
being.
against the opposite of what we've always said about the presidency. The person who most wants the job is the person who should have it least.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it should be forced on somebody. What? Damn it.
Yeah, which reminds me, what time is it?
I have
Oh,
pickleball on every Tuesday.
um, the Trump campaign
Mhm.
filed an ethics complaint
What
against Ron DeSantis. Now,
was
Florida
he was not declared a candidacy yet.
Now, Florida has a law. It's a brand new law. Didn't exist last time when Marco Rubio ran. It wasn't there in 2016. But they have this new law that says if you want to run for any other office, you have to resign the office that you currently hold.
Right. I'm not opposed to that kind of law, to be honest with you.
I'm not opposed to it. The interesting thing is he's not a declared candidate for president.
Right. Probably because of that law.
Yeah, most likely, yes. Although my understanding is that the Florida legislature is going to take another look at that law and
Yeah,
throw
do
in some
something like you
carve
could
outs.
finish out your term or something, or yeah, I don't know. It's going to be Ron DeSantis favorably.
But as far as I can tell, Donald Trump is living in mortal terror of Ron DeSantis.
Good. I'm glad he recognizes what seems obvious to me.
He clearly fears DeSantis, and he's clearly doing everything he can to try to torpedo him.
Yeah,
And I think DeSantis is doing exactly what he should. When
ignore
people
him.
when people ask him, what Donald Trump said this about you and Donald Trump said that about you, and his response has been, "Yeah, I'm spending my time trying to find results for the people of Florida, not attacking other Republicans."
Absolutely.
And that's all he'll say,
Yeah,
because
that's all he needs to say.
because never wrestle a pig. You just get muddy, and the pig enjoys it.
At least not wrestle a pig in its own venue. Drag the pig into to a place where it's not comfortable.
I still go back to my strategy of dealing with Donald Trump would be to just
Well,
listen
laugh them off.
politely whenever he said something, laugh, and go, okay, Don. Anyway, and
I
just
mean, seriously,
just
like
treat him as an
defanging him
irrelevance.
is so easy. Oh, that's a good one. Good shot, buddy. All right, now on to serious things.
Yeah, and just
I
just
mean, how
just
hard is
just
that?
ignore him. He's the crazy uncle at the table.
Yes.
Unfortunately, he's a crazy uncle with about 30% diehard support among GOP voters.
So, it's interesting. I heard somebody, it wasn't Selena Zito, but it was somebody like that that kind of goes out into the hinterlands and talks to these people.
You mean out into flyover country with the rubes and
Yeah.
hayseeds?
Yeah. Can you imagine without any protection? Um, and the sentiment that was heard most often, according to this guy, was that they're worried about um, somebody getting in there and being sucked into the whole DC vortex, the whole swamp vortex again. They trust Trump not to get sucked into that because, well, first of all, they hate him. And second of all, he just doesn't need them. So some of them are hesitant to not back uh, um, to not back Trump and to switch their allegiance at all because they're afraid that anybody else other than Trump will get is just going to be part of that DC swamp again, and then they're going to end up being ignored again. Understandable because a lot of these people uh, weren't traditional voters. I mean, they were the people who came out and voted for Trump in 2016 were either sometime Democratic voters or mostly just not voters at all. He found a wellspring of people who felt forgotten and just out of the game. And he spoke to them, and he got them on board in droves. Um, DeSantis is not a populist. That's just not who he is. He's a little bit more of a traditional conservative, although he has that sort of shoot from the hip and not worry too much about the consequences that Donald Trump has. And well, I think he's a lot smarter. And not that Trump is dumb. Trump's not dumb. I think that's ridiculous to say he's dumb. DeSantis, though, I think is smarter, and he's much more polished, and he has a much better battle temperament in that he can be forceful, straightforward, get to the jugular, and not sound like a crazy man. He doesn't try to make you crazy. Where Trump is more like the Bluebeard or Blackbeard, whoever it was that like tied the the candles into his beard.
Blackbeard.
Right? I mean, that's a little more Trumpish. It's like, I'm just going to scare the fuck out of you, make you worry about me. DeSantis is more like, I don't even care about you because I know I'm right. And anything you come at me with, I can counter. It's not even a problem. Matter of fact, I'm going to roll right over you. I'm probably going to be 3 steps ahead of you before you even get there. So I've got control of this. And he seems so competent. He comes across as an actual leader. Trump is a leader of chaos, though.
Let me ask you an honest question. Can Donald Trump get elected?
I don't think so.
I don't either.
I really don't think so. Maybe he can get the nomination. And if he does, I'll vote for him.
Yeah, look, he's got a hard 30% in the Republican Party. I mean, now, I mean, who knows? Who knows? In a year, we may be saying something completely different. But for right now,
that's true. Yeah.
And it's only 2023, for goodness sakes. We've got
Here's
another
the thing that
8 months
Trump
to go
has
before
going
this
for him
election
that
starts.
nobody else does, and he won't bring it up. He won't go this way because I don't know. That would make sense. Hey, all these other guys are putting out the positions that I've already held. Oh, yeah, and I made work. I've already done it as president. However much these guys have done or think they can do or want to do, I've already done it. You've seen me do it. Look where you are now under the guy after me. I can do that again. We can go back to that, to no inflation, to oil or energy independent. We can go back to that. So all you got to do is put me in charge.
Basically, sort of the Grover Cleveland type of campaign.
I mean, essentially.
Hey, last time I was president, things worked out pretty well.
Yeah, he's the only one in that position.
Well, except for Grover Cleveland.
That's what I mean. Other than Grover Cleveland, he's the only one in that Grover. Well, I guess Teddy Roosevelt, but
yeah, but Teddy Roosevelt didn't win his comeback election.
No,
he lost to Woodrow Wilson.
Well, he lost to everybody because he pulled that whole moose crap.
Yes, but it would be unusual for a former president who lost his first reelection bid. Like I said, Grover Cleveland, the only president that's ever done it.
The only other one.
To come back 4 years later and re-win it. I just think that there is so much, he just brings so much baggage with him. I just don't see.
That's the biggest problem. The question is, has Joe Biden and his team screwed us over so badly that people would rather take a devil they know that at least brought them some fortune than the devil they know who is so incompetent and seemingly so against everything that's actually in our interests? I don't know. It's a close call. It's a very close call.
Well, that also assumes that most Americans are paying attention to that, and that
I think they're paying attention to their wallets. They're definitely paying attention to, what restrictions are being placed on them every day, what they can do,
whether they can buy eggs,
whether they can buy guns. whether they can get a driver's license that is going to work around the country, whether they can travel across the country, except for some weird COVID regulations that some other place is going to put into effect. Our country's really, really divided along many, many different lines. Biden has done nothing but exacerbate those lines. At least under Trump, a lot of people hated him. And a lot of us put up with him even because he was doing good things in government, but didn't like him or the way he expressed himself. Although it was funny sometimes. I will give him that. It's like a devil's bargain when it comes down to incompetent Joe Biden and whoever the hell is actually running the show, or crazy ass Donald Trump, who isn't that much younger than Biden.
Oh, no, he'll be 78.
Yeah. So we're talking about two old. I mean, this is like what were those movies? Grumpier and Grumpier or something.
Grumpy old men.
Grumpy old men. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I would prefer not to have an octogenarian as president
I agree.
of either party. I think that it is not a job that older people are well suited for.
That's what I'm holding out, that DeSantis eventually puts his hat in there.
Although, based on something you said, I don't know what is more frightening, that Joe Biden is actually in control and that he is the mastermind behind all this, or that he is not in control and that we don't know who the mastermind is. I don't know which of those is a more frightening prospect.
I think it's more frightening that it's Joe who's in charge, to be honest. I assume that whoever is running the show, Ron Klain or Susan Rice or whoever it is, has a little bit more on the ball than Joe Biden. I mean, so he told that story. So here's something a little special interest to me. When he told that story, he went on the Daily Show with Cal Penn, Kumar of Harold and Kumar fame, and talked about gay marriage and oh, these rights are being driven back and blah blah blah. Oh, I can remember exactly when I had my epiphany. It was when my dad was dropping me off at high school.
Now, this is
And
the 1950s, by the way, just
it
so that
was
we're clear.
1961. It would have been 1961, and um, he dropped me off at high school, and I saw two well-dressed men kissing, and then each going their separate ways, one to the Hercules building, I assume, and one probably to the DuPont building. And it was simple. And I turned to my dad, and he was like, "It's simple, Joey. They love each other." And I've always thought of that.
No, it's Joey.
Now,
It's simple, Joey.
and so what's interesting to me about that, aside from the fact that
Aside from the fact that we have to
1961,
believe that two men kissed in public on a public
in
street in
1961,
1961, sure. Go ahead. Yeah, yeah, that happened. Yeah, sure.
so that seems weird. The other thing is, I went to the same school that he did. It's nowhere near either the DuPont building or the Hercules building, which wasn't even built until the 80s. That's a little weird. As a matter of fact, two well dressed men going anywhere in the neighborhood where the high school is would be like, what? Where are they going? There's nowhere to go. There's no places for them to work. It's just nothing about that made any sense whatsoever. And yet he tells this story over and over and over again.
Oh, yeah, he's told this story for years, by the way.
And I know that at one point he told it about, which would make more sense, about being dropped off at City Hall to go and apply to become a lifeguard for the city. That would make a little more sense, because the DuPont building is downtown on Rodney Square. Again, there was no Hercules building there at the time. Um, it still only sort of makes sense. And even then, what, why was he dropping you off?
Look, you and I both know that that story is a lie and that it never happened.
Of course it is.
This
And
is
but
just
it
some.
just
This is
keeps
just.
adding these details to it that are just like, are you fucking kidding? Everybody from Wilmington, Delaware knows that can't be true.
But most people have never been to Wilmington, Delaware, so it doesn't matter.
To their shame.
It sounds. It sounds like a good story, and it's the kind of story that Joe tells.
Oh yeah. I grew up in a mostly Puerto Rican neighborhood. How he
Yeah.
used to go to the black church.
he he had he had
That's my
a
favorite.
he had a
He went to
rom-
the black church at 7:30, and then he went to Catholic mass, I assume in Claymont, uh, for 10 o'clock mass. I'm like, Joe, how the fuck did you get from one to the other? Like,
Yeah, well, look,
and why? Why would you do both?
again, it's pointless to try to come up with the factual reasoning behind these stories because they have none. These are just little stories that Joe tells because he thinks it'll make people listen. And look, there
It's
are,
his way
and
of saying, hey,
apparently,
I'm just like you.
and
I'm just like
apparently
you.
there are plenty of folks who believe him. Apparently there are plenty of folks who just think that Joe is full of this folksy wisdom. But these are all lies. None of this stuff ever happened. I'm just
No,
telling you right now, you did not on the streets of Wilmington, Delaware in 1961 see two well dressed men smooching openly in public. That
hell
just
no.
didn't happen.
As a matter of fact, that was only about 2 or 3 years from the race riots in downtown Wilmington. That my best friend, his dad, was part of quelling as a city police officer. Yeah, no, things were not all
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure.
flowers and
Yeah, I'm
headdresses.
pretty sure in 1961 you wouldn't find too many grown men kissing on the streets of San Francisco, which was already known as kind of a gay capital of the West Coast.
Yeah,
So, yeah,
Shangri-La as it was.
but he tells these little stories and
And people actually believe him. That's what.
yeah, that's the thing. He knows that they'll believe him. And look, Joe is it's like we talked about a couple of times here, the vice presidential debate in 2012. Whenever Paul Ryan said, look, on this date, the Republicans did this, the Democrats did that. We then came back and did this, the Democrats did that. And we've done everything we can to try to do this. And the Democrats have blocked us at every turn. And Joe
Yeah.
Biden went, oh, Paul, that didn't happen that
Oh,
way.
he did one of these. You like,
Yeah. Yeah. It was just like that. That didn't happen. And Paul Ryan just stood there like a deer, or sat there like a deer caught in the headlights, just staring at him like, but this is what happened. It really
no,
was.
really, it did happen.
I saw something on Twitter today that somebody said, I've now reached the age where I have been lectured completely erroneously by a young person about a
I
historical event
sent you
that I
that.
clearly remember. Was it you that sent me that?
I sent you and Dale, you and
And
Bruce
Bruce?
that earlier in the week.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it was from Twitter, but it was a message.
I,
And,
well, I didn't get it from Twitter, but
and, uh, can I find that? Yes. One disorienting thing about getting older that nobody tells you about is how weird it is to get a really passionate, extremely wrong lecture from a much younger person about verifiable historical events you can personally remember pretty well.
that describes all of the Reagan years, at least parts of Vietnam for me, but definitely the Carter years.
Yes, which, by the way, it appears that we are very close to getting a brand new hagiography of 1977 to 1981, as President Carter seemingly is close to death.
I mean, true. I will say this: Carter was not this bad.
No, that's the thing. At least Jimmy Carter.
Started deregulation.
Yeah, most people don't realize that Jimmy Carter also started the military buildup that Reagan
That's right.
continued. after Defense Secretary Harold Brown said, "Sir, we just have to do it," and he signed on to that, deregulated the airlines. Ronald Reagan took over from that and took that even further.
And continued it.
But, I think Jimmy Carter's problem was not that he was incompetent and not that he wasn't smart.
No, he's obviously smart.
And
he wasn't incompetent. I think he didn't have that leadership.
He wasn't decisive and he overthought everything. And
he was, I mean, what, he was a naval officer at least.
He was a nuclear engineer in the Navy.
Yeah.
Not a dumb guy.
No.
Probably one of the smartest people who've ever been president. Although, interestingly enough,
true.
Our best presidents seem not to have been our smartest ones.
I agree.
I mean, if you can go down the list of really smart presidents, topping them would be Woodrow Wilson.
Allegedly.
Well,
he was smart for his own good, maybe.
He was president of Columbia University. I mean,
Princeton.
You're right, Princeton. And he had been a college professor. I mean, he was certainly well educated. Although, what well educated means we can. Well, I suspect if you had a university,
it was probably better back then.
I suspect if you had a university education in the 1880s, that you were probably a pretty smart fella. If you have a university education today,
who knows?
I'm still gonna keep some questions in my mind about how smart
Woodrow Wilson had some very strange ideas about what America was about. And they were all pretty antithetical to the Constitution itself. It's like, yeah, we got it pretty good now, but all that stuff that made this possible, I'm not good with that. We need to go in a different direction.
Yeah, and a direction that meant he could be president for life at the end of the day.
He couldn't even be president for his own life. His wife had to take over.
Yeah, what was it, the last year and a half?
Yeah, he was basically an invalid.
Well, he had a stroke, and the only person who could communicate with him was his wife, who would then go into the bedroom.
It was like having John Fetterman for president.
Yeah. She would go into the bedroom, and she would discuss things with President Wilson alone, President Wilson alone. And then she would come out and announce what the president had decided should be done. And everyone just said, all right, well, that's what the president wants. I guess we'll do it. And nobody once said, you think the president could run that by me?
Can we get a record of that? Oh my God. So we're just as loony as every other country that has ever existed in the world. I mean, that's kind of the bottom line. Our founding principles are unique and I think inspirational. But putting them into practice is going to run into all the same problems that running any country it runs into. You're always going to run into factionalism. You're always going to run into power seekers. You're always going to run into corruption.
Yeah, but we had a system that was set up to minimize the bad effects of that.
Absolutely.
By limiting the power of the federal government. No, we don't. And we don't have a limited federal government anymore, as we are learning more and more every day. However, with that said, I think that's probably where we're going to have to end it for tonight, since we're an hour and a half into this thing.
Happy St. Pat's.
You too, buddy.
All our listeners. Love you guys.
We'll talk to you later. All right. Well, you have been listening to the Observations podcast for... Michael is wondering how to get out. As I was about to say, you've been listening to the Observations podcast for Friday, the 17th of March, 2023. We're switching the streaming schedule from Friday to Sunday, so next week we'll be on Sunday at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern, and hopefully switching it to a Sunday afternoon or early evening, vice relatively late on a Friday. Make it a little more traction with some listeners. instead of trying to do it on a Friday. Anyway, have a great week. We will look forward to talking to you Sunday. See you then. So long.